Good afternoon, welcome. We'll let everyone take a moment to just join and we'll get started with our program. It's great to have everyone back again today for our Houston Business COVID-19. We do have Patrick Jankowski back today to provide his economic update. Patrick's been with us bi-weekly now, so looking forward to getting his analysis today. We still have quite a few people that are joining us, so we'll wait just a second to continue the program. In the meantime, I did put the protocols for this webinar on the screen here, so you have a chance to look through that, and you can let us know via the chat feature if you have any technical issues. Also submit your questions using the Q&A tab and raising your hand virtually if you want to alert someone from the team that you're having problems with your screen or with your sound or the speaker sound. So I'll leave this up for just a second while we're letting everyone join, and then we'll get started. All right, it looks like most people have joined us. So again, if you can just take a look at these webinar tips and get yourself familiar with your screen controls. Our chat feature is being used for comments and to express any technical difficulties you might be having. Also, you can submit questions for our speaker. That's Patrick today on the Q&A tab. This helps us to sort through questions versus comments. And then also, if you can raise your hand virtually, there's a little icon on your control bar that allows you to do that. And it'll give you an opportunity to, for our behind the scenes staff to chat with you in private mode. Well, thank you again for joining us for our COVID-19 Houston Business Forum series. We've been doing these since about March 13th. And so we are pleased today to have Patrick Jankowski, our Senior Vice President of Research and Partnership, join us. A few resource tips for you all today. I know you're familiar with our Houston.org coronavirus web page, but did want to draw your attention that we are continuously presenting new information on this site. So feel free to take a look at that today, see what else is new. We have posting information regarding the governor's executive order, the latest updates, as well as all federal, state, and local protocols. So you can find that information on houston.org/coronavirus. And of course, please contact our membership team if you have any questions about any upcoming events. We are getting back to normal in a strange normal sense, but we will be virtually convening our committees, our business resource groups, councils, and other major events. And you can visit our Houston.org events website, or just contact our member engagement team and they can direct you to some of that new virtual meeting content. Also, if you are looking for information, not webinars, but other information with regards to your business and getting through this period of time, we actually have podcasts as well. So Business Bayou Download, this is where Patrick Jankowski is featured, and he presents issues such as this latest one, what businesses are weighing as reopen begins. And then also our Small Biz Insider podcast. And we do direct the content around this podcast to our small and medium-sized businesses. And the latest one was financial advice on weathering COVID-19. So in light of the fact that it is National Small Business Month, we are going to be adding new content to our Small Biz Insider podcast, as well as to other programming throughout the rest of this month. So we've been adding resources and webinars and podcasts for our small business community, and we're happy to do that. If you have any questions at all about small business, please do contact our membership team and they can direct you to those resources. I did want to bring to everyone's attention, and Patrick will talk about it a little bit at the end of his presentation today, that he will be presenting his State of Houston's Global Economy report. We have a virtual event that's coming up, and we want to thank our presenting sponsor, Mitsubishi Corporation Americas, for allowing us to do that. Patrick will be presenting in a virtual streamed event on Wednesday, May 27th from noon to 1:30. He will be joined with the former U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Carlos Gutierrez, in a fireside chat. Registration is required for this event, so if you go to houston.org/events, you can register there, and members do receive complimentary registration. Our non-members do have a small nominal fee to join us for that. So we look forward to having you join us. Patrick's got a lot of great information he's going to be presenting there. So now on to our program. Everyone knows Patrick, so I don't need to go into a long introduction. He is our Senior Vice President of Research for the Greater Houston Partnership, so pleased to have him back. Obviously a frequent speaker of ours. We'll continue to have him provide updates. And as a reminder, we will be posting this entire presentation on our website later today, back at that web page that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Patrick to join us when he has a moment, and he's going to share information, the latest information on the economy, as well as what he sees on the global outlook as well. Patrick?
Okay, I want to make sure, can everybody hear me? Carrie, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, Patrick.
Okay, very good. I always need to make sure of that before I get started. I want to make sure that there is no problem with you guys hearing me. Well, once again, I want to say thank you very much for joining me on this podcast, this webinar, trying to give you guys some insight as to what's going on in the economy. It's been a very trying times for us, but it looks like we're starting to see a little bit of improvement, a little bit of reopening. So, Carrie, it seems like I'm having a little bit of a problem with advancing the slides as we discussed before this. My little buttons aren't coming up on the bottom. Could you advance to the first slide for me, please? Okay. Okay, Carrie, if you go to the first slide, please. Let's start with number of confirmed cases in the U.S. Just shy of 1.4 million confirmed cases in the U.S. and 80,000 deaths. And that was as of last night. As we know, this thing's progressing fairly steadily. I'm sure that we are well over 1,350 cases, and we're probably going to hit 85,000 deaths pretty soon, if not 100,000 deaths before that. So next slide, Carrie. Back up one, please, Carrie. Other way back up, please. Going the wrong way. Now I have control of my screen, so thank you very much. I didn't have it earlier. Let's talk about the number of confirmed cases in Houston. You can see the progression starting in late March, all the way up to where we were just 2 days ago. 11,000 cases so far. We haven't quite peaked yet. It's actually kind of interesting. You can almost lay a ruler on that, and you could mark the progression of that. So, time to talk about the economy, time to talk about economics. You know, I always need a transition slide between major topics, and I was trying to figure out what to put for the economy, whether it should be a bankroll or a piggy bank or something. And unfortunately, this popped up. This is probably the best example, best way to introduce what we're actually seeing going on in the U.S. economy. You know, the headline last week, most people probably saw that, U.S. GDP slumped 4.8% in the first quarter, ending the longest economic expansion on record. That should be the longest economic expansion on record for Houston. And you get an idea. Actually, the expansion goes all the way back to 2010. That's a lot of data. I only wanted to put about 5 years of data, but you can see the most recent 5 years, how strong growth has been. We only had 1 or 2 weak quarters, but then you look at that first quarter of 2020, and GDP dropped 4.8%. And that's real GDP. That's after you've taken inflation into consideration. The way the Bureau of Economic Analysis calculates GDP, it's a little different. We're often hear about job numbers related to different industries, whether it's retail or restaurants or manufacturing. And BEA, rather than giving you your old textbook definition, let me just say what BEA talks about in their press release. And they talk about consumer spending, business investment, inventories and exports, all of which that you see in BEA's calculations went down. They went down significantly, especially consumer spending and business investment. The only two that ticked up were residential construction. That may be a lag because things got started early in the quarter and they didn't slow down yet. And then government expenditures. And I think with all the money that Congress has passed for different stimulus packages, it's really obvious that government expenditures have gone up. So that brings us to the second quarter. We know the first quarter went down 4.8%. What is the second quarter going to look like? I put on the screen for you there a half a dozen different forecasts from half a dozen different organizations. If you take rid of the outliers, Wells Fargo and maybe the Congressional Budget Office, we're looking at a decline in GDP in the second quarter, the quarter we're in, by probably about 35, 36, 37%. That's a very steep drop. Now, that's a 1 quarter drop, and hopefully that is going to be the worst of it. If you look at the same forecast, though, most of them are expecting to see growth pick up in the third quarter and again in the fourth quarter. But every forecast I've looked at, whether it's these 6 on the screen or the other half dozen I've looked at, do not show the U.S. getting back to where it was in December. This December does not. In December, I was getting back to where we were in January starting this year. Even with the stimulus, even with the recovery, we're going to finish 2020 with a smaller economy, with less GDP and less jobs than we started with.
Patrick, sorry,
yes,
this is Carrie. We've gotten a couple of comments indicating that you're a bit muffled on your voice. So maybe just directing your voice at your at the computer and maybe not turning. I'm not sure if that's what it is, but we're getting a few.
Okay. Well, is this any better, Carrie, if I speak like this?
Well, it sounds great right now. Yes.
Okay. I apologize for that. I was leaning into my computer because I was leaning into my presentation. So I guess I need to kind of, as my mom said, I guess I need to sit up straight at the table. So I'll go ahead and do that now. As I was saying that, we're looking at some very serious downturns in the second quarter. Almost all the forecasts I look at show upturns starting in the third quarter, continued growth in the fourth. But even by the end of the fourth quarter, we won't be back to where we started the year at. And we will probably won't get back to where we started this year at, probably till sometime in the middle of 2021. Let's talk a little bit about unemployment. You probably saw all the headlines that came out. 33 million have sought U.S. unemployment aid since the virus hit. That's absolutely phenomenal number of filings. And you can see them here on this chart right here. This is one I've included in the last few presentations, telling for a few reasons. You can look at this and you can definitely see the 33 million in claims, but also what you see, it's kind of heartening to see that it looks like claims peaked at the end of March, the beginning of April, and we're starting a steady decline in claims. Now, they're still elevated. I mean, you can look at May 2nd. You need to put 3 zeros after that. So you've got 226,000 claims in May of last year, first week of May last year, versus about 3.2 million this year. Absolutely phenomenal increase, but you can definitely see the patterns. You can definitely see that claims are coming in at a lower rate each week. And so I hope this is a signal that the worst of the layoffs and the worst of the downturn is over, at least as far as employment goes. So the other headline that came out, April unemployment rate rose to a record 14.7%. You need to think about that at 14.7%. That's like saying 1 in every 7 persons in the US, 1 in every 7 workers in the US is out of a job. You know, for those of us who have been in Houston for a while, those of us who lived through the 80s downturn, that's what the 80s downturn in Houston was. In Houston, we lost 1 in every 7 jobs from 1982 to 1980, early 87. Now we've lost 1 in every 7 jobs just in 6 weeks in the US. You want to look at that unemployment rate over time. I plotted it back to the beginning of the millennium. And you can look and see that first short recession we had at the beginning of the millennium, the one associated with 9/11, the one associated with the loss of business confidence, it rose to 6%, and then it winded its way down. Then you can see where we were with the Great Recession. That's the one in the very middle of the screen where we barely got up to about 10.2% peak unemployment. And you can see how we worked ourselves down over the last 10 years. And then suddenly we see this incredible spike in unemployment at 14.7%. I want to offer you a little bit of detail on that. One of the things that the Bureau of Labor Statistics provides at the national level is unemployment by different cohorts. And you can see on the left-hand side, you can see in the middle column where we were in March for adult work, for all workers, for adult men, for adult women, and teenagers. And you can look and see how much it's changed over a month. Now, unfortunately, we cannot get this level of data for the Houston metropolitan statistical area, but Houston mirrors the US much more now than it ever has before. And so I would really feel fairly confident in saying that the unemployment rates in Houston for these age groups are probably very similar. They wouldn't be off by more than a percentage point one way or the other for unemployment. So let's go ahead and look at another age group, another set, and this is unemployment by ethnicity. And you can see where we were in March and where we are in April, and you can see the unemployment rate for whites, for blacks, for Hispanics, and for Asians. If you look at it for these ethnic groups, this is the highest unemployment rate on record for every ethnic group you see except for blacks. And blacks got up a bit higher in the last recession. They got up pretty close to 20%. So I want to go to one other set, and this is the unemployment that we're seeing in the US based on educational attainment. One of the big takeaways from this is that those who have lack in education, those who did not finish high school, are the ones who are really suffering the most. Now you can see that 1 in every 5 Americans who did not graduate from high school is currently unemployed, actually a little bit more than 1 in 5. And you can see as you move up in the educational attainment ladder, the lower the unemployment rate is. Now that's still phenomenal even for those with a bachelor's degree or higher, that 8.4% unemployment rate. It had been 2.5%. You know, if you guys out there have any kids that are thinking about, oh, well, mom, maybe I shouldn't go to college, or maybe dad, I don't need to get any extra schooling, you need to show them this chart and show them just how much better off or how much likely you are to survive the ups and downs of the economy if you have some education. Even an associate's degree, and we've talked about these skills gaps that we've had that in Houston, especially in some of the process industries and some of the crafts and trades. And those people, yes, their unemployment rate has gone up, but it's not nearly as high as those that just have a high school degree or who never finished schooling. So let's talk about unemployment rate. It's 14.7%, and there's some discussion out there that is really undercounting the level of unemployment. And when you get to be a data wonk like me, or a bit of a data nerd like me, you're the sort that not only looks at the table but wants to go down and read the footnotes. And I've been reading a lot of footnotes, like in a lot of appendums. And there was this one here, yeah, it's real detailed, but if you look at it, it says the unemployment rate would have been 5 percentage points higher. And that's because you need to understand just a little bit why the unemployment rate should really be closer to 20% than closer to 15%. But when the unemployment rate's gathered, it's not gathered based on unemployment insurance claims. That's a totally different set of data. It's based on a household survey where they call people up and ask them questions. Sometimes it's done online. and they ask them a series of questions. And one of the questions they say, are you employed? Are you not employed? Or they say, if you're not employed, are you looking for work? And there's this whole series of questions. And one of the issues that there was a bit of a misunderstanding during the survey process, where people were not working due to the coronavirus, were actually classified as being employed but absent from work. And so they were actually counted as being employed when they should have been saying they were unemployed on temporary layoff. And it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but if you're unemployed on temporary layoff, you know, that's maybe hoping you'll get called back to work, but it means you're not getting payroll, you're not collecting benefits or anything. Where if you're employed but absent from work, so I know it's a long explanation, but if you look at that, really the unemployment rate should have been closer to 19.7%. And if you think about those who are simply have dropped out of the workforce, the unemployment rate for the US is probably, based on all of those other data points, or the people who are not looking or the people who are misclassified, the unemployment rate, the real unemployment rate in the US is probably over 20%. It's probably closer to 21%. That would mean 1 in every 5 workers in the US is unemployed, and that's really is scary. I clicked too fast. Okay, let me back up. Other headline that you guys probably saw, the US job losses in April were the worst since the Great Recession. If you want to look here, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail than you probably get if you simply pick up the newspaper or listen to NPR. I've broken this table into 2 different tables, and you're looking there at the 6 sectors that had the biggest hit. You can look at what I've done is I've added the March job losses and the April job losses together. So it shows you we've lost about 21 million jobs in the US since the coronavirus outbreak. And we're still don't have all the data from May yet, because we knew that other losses are being in there. So these numbers are going to climb. But if you want to look at that, you can look at that middle column, and that shows you the number of people laid off nationwide, the people who, based on, and this is a different sort of survey. This is a survey of employers, not survey of households. It's actually referred to as establishment survey, where they actually ask the people who sign the paychecks, the people who issue the benefits, how many people do you have on payroll, and then BLS does all the math. And you can see that nationwide, we've lost almost half our food service and drinking place jobs. Basically, we've lost almost half our restaurant jobs and our jobs at bars and places that serve alcohol. A lot of people like to think that the white collar workforce has been fairly immune or not quite as impacted. But you can look there and see professional and business services, 1 in every 10 classic white collar workers has been let go. I look at retail trade. I don't fully understand that. I think that should be lower, but I'm going to have to go back and try to figure out what's going on with the data. You can see with healthcare as well, there are a lot of elective procedures that aren't being done. There are people who need their teeth cleaned that aren't getting them cleaned. There are people who should be going into the doctors for wellness visits that have just been put off. So you're starting to see a drop there. If you want to go to that next sector, and you can look at these other sectors too. These are the lower losses. I want to take you all the way down to mining and logging. And this is losses on a US basis. Oil and gas extraction is a subset of this. This would include both the people who work in the offices in downtown Houston and the people who work out in the field servicing the oil wells. Because this is data for March and April, and it's kind of wonky because the way the question's asked, they ask the question, they need to know how many people, BLS wants to know how many people were on payroll for the pay period that included the 12th day of the month. So we're really looking at job losses in oil and gas through the middle of April. And a lot has happened since then. I really expect this number to go up significantly over the next few months, and we'll report on that when we get that data. So who did hire? Yeah, there was some hiring. These are technically net numbers, but if you want to go back, there are about 150 sectors and subsectors that BLS tracks, and I only found 6 that actually had hiring in those sectors. And it's the ones that probably shouldn't surprise anybody who's listening to this webinar. We can look at courier services. You look at, that's all the deliveries for all that online retail and that we're delivering. The computer manufacturers, is a demand for that. Federal government, as they're trying to serve it. Monetary authorities, that's the Federal Reserve. Other information services, sounds like an obtuse category, but that's actually people who provide internet services. Think of Netflix and all those others. And general merchandise stores, and that's where Walmart and Target would fall into. So there was some hiring, but not very much hiring, and it's in the sort of areas that you would expect us to see during a pandemic like this. So one or two more US charts, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about Texas. This is the US Purchasing Managers Index. It's not the Houston Purchasing Managers Index. Those who have listened to me before know I really like this, and I wanted to show you the pattern. It falls somewhat similar to the Houston pattern, but not quite the same. If you look at 09, that dip is a lot deeper in the US than it is for Houston. If you go to that 15 and 16 where we had the fracking bust, it dips a little bit for the US, but it dips a lot deeper in Houston. And then go to that very last data point, and you can see that the PMI for the US is 41.5. And what's so important is that whenever the PMI is above 50, that's a sign the economy is expanding and should continue to expand. And it is sunk from just barely above 50 to 41.5, which is gives you some idea just the seriousness of the downturn in the economy, especially on the manufacturing side. So let's talk a little bit about Texas and what we see going on in the Texas economy. This is something I'm once again looking for a transition screenshot. This is something I pulled from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, something they posted about the Texas economic activity fall sharply in the wake of COVID-19. And I actually thought it was kind of cute. They've got their, someone took a surgical mask and used a red marker and showed that downturn there. So kudos to whoever it was at the Fed with this great creative artistic talent trying to overlap the COVID-19 face mask and what's going on with the economy. So let's go ahead and jump to Texas. And these are unemployment insurance claims for Texas. And you can see this is a little different than the claims that I saw or that I showed you for the US, because we're not seeing that downward trend, that sharp downward trend in Texas like we saw in the rest of the US. I don't have a good explanation for this other than maybe the virus is attacking us a lot later than attacked the rest of the nation. It could be an issue with processing because as I go back and look at some of the Houston claims, they've gone back and revised downward the number of claims for the last few months, the last few weeks. I will let you know, I checked 30 minutes before going on this webinar and they had just posted the data to the website. It wasn't there at 9 this morning. And so I managed to update the Houston claims, but I didn't get the Texas claims updated in time. So they may have revised April 2nd down and May 2nd, April 25th down and May 2nd, but I won't know that until I get off this call. But I can show you a few more slides. I will show you what it looks like for Houston. So once again, though, we're still laboring under this incredible lag in data. Today is the 12th. We won't know for another 10 days just how serious this impact has been on employment in Houston. And once again, that April 2020, that's going to be employment as of April 12th. So hopefully we'll have some good insight. And then in June 19th, we'll have data for May. And that data for May is going to include data from April 13th through May 12th, May 11th. So we'll have a good insight when the data comes out in 10 days. And for those, Carrie talked about the Global Houston event, and that's going to be 2 weeks from tomorrow. I will talk about the employment numbers at the Global Houston event as well as other things global. But I'm really, myself, like a lot of the other economists out there, a lot of the local data watchers are really concerned about what's happening and really looking forward. How can you look forward to something that you know is going to be negative? We're really anticipating what this is going to show us. So let's talk just a little bit about Texas and the Texas manufacturing sector and what we see. Dallas Fed does this wonderful set of surveys they do on a monthly basis. We don't get GDP on a monthly basis, but we do get some insight, and you can see it here on the screen. They ask a bunch of questions of a bunch of manufacturers that come up with a lot of data, but I'm just showing you 4 basic categories. One is production, the other is capacity utilization, one is new orders, and the other is shipments. And you look at those gray numbers, and that's the number of respondents that said in April their production went up versus what it was in March. are the number in capacity utilization, utilizing more capacity. The blue line is no change, the blue column. And the far right column is the number of respondents that said their production decreased by 65% almost. Their capacity utilization is down almost 64%. Their new orders have fallen by almost 3/4. Shipments are down by about 2/3. So there's something known as a diffusion index. And what you do is economists like to subtract the increases from the decreases, or add them together in this case, and figure out, and that's when you get that far right column, you get an index that kind of gives you some insight as to the health of production, capacity, new orders, and shipments. Whenever it's negative, that's a bad sign. I mean, that is a really bad sign. It's pretty much the same way that the general PMI is put together, but you can see overall that the businesses, the manufacturers in the state of Texas are many more are reporting decreases in prime indicators than are reporting increases. Now, if you want to look at it and how they crunch all the numbers together and they create a production index, it's real similar to the PMI. They work in other indicators other than the 4 I showed you. I didn't want to crowd the screen too much. And just as a general indicator of production activity, you can look and see that it's down 55.3%. Now, once again, I always like to point, you look at 08 and 09, that's the Great Recession. You look around 14, 15, 16, that was a fracking bust. And you can see where it is. So let's look at services. Let's look at the Texas service sector. Similar thing, they do the survey. Manufacturing is obviously different than services. And you can see how few companies in Texas reported an increase in their revenues. How few companies reported, how few in the survey reported an increase in employment. Yes, there were some that reported an increase, not very many. The number of hours their employees worked or selling prices. Middle column is no change, but you go back over there and you look at that far right column and the number that are reporting a decrease in revenue. 3/4 of the companies in the service sector in Texas in the survey said their revenues decreased in April. Shouldn't be any surprise. You're looking at over 1/3 reduced in employment. Over half reduced the total number of hours their employees were working. About half saw their prices that they could charge for their products fall. Now, all key indicators for the service sector. So once again, let's subtract the negatives from the positives, or let's add the negatives to the positives, and you can look at that index there. And you can look and see just how dramatically revenues for the service firms in Texas have been affected. By and large, the service sector in Texas is being hurt so significantly. Here it is. There are a bunch of other indicators, like I said. The Fed crunches them all together, and you can look at where they're showing just the health. Another way to look at this is the health of the service sector in Texas. And you can see how much it fell in March and just barely marginally ticked. That's within margin of error. We're basically 65 and a -65 on that index, when ideally you'd like to be at 0 or above. Now you can kind of look back at that. If you go all the way back to 08, 09, and as you're looking at that, you can see it struggled during the Great Recession, but no other times has it struggled like this. So let's talk about Houston. Talk about my hometown, the place I was born and raised and grew up and practiced my craft. So there you go. There's the unemployment claims for Houston, something I was able to update just before we went on to the webinar. You do see a little bit of a trend downward there. We had a bit of a tick up in May. But essentially, if you go back and you add all those claims together, from March 21st to May 2nd, it comes up to 388,000 claims. So we're just shy of 400,000 claims for unemployment insurance. I suspect, because as I've gone and worked with this and looked at, I go to update my slides and I'm saying, oh, that number is different. They are revising downward. They have revised downward. They revised downward 18 and 25, or the 18th and 25th. So I suspect they may revise downward May 2nd a little bit. Even if they do revise it down, we're right at 400,000 jobs lost based on initial claims for unemployment insurance. A couple things you need to know about the data. This is a little bit higher than we will probably see in non-farm payroll employment. I think I talked about this on the last call because that's the term, it's payroll employment. And that's what reports, that's what we get from Texas Workforce Commission. Because of changes in the way Congress passed the benefits package, self-employed and gig workers are allowed to apply for unemployment. And so it does truly reflect the number of people who are out of work, but it's not going to necessarily align with the number of payroll jobs lost. The other is these are the number of claims that have been filed. They're not necessarily all the claims that have been processed. Some of these will be thrown out because they're duplicates or because they are ineligible. Any way you look at it, though, Houston has lost a significant number of jobs. Even if they throw out a bunch of claims, I really think we've probably lost 350,000 or more jobs. So here's the PMI for Houston. I showed you the PMI for the US, and I showed you some of those other things that are similar to PMI, the other diffusion indexes for services and manufacturing. Go to the far right, look how low that is. That is a reading of 34.6. After they've taken all these numbers and crunch, they talk, the Institute for Supply Management talks to purchasing managers on a monthly basis. Asks them all these questions about sales, about production, about backlogs, about hiring, about prices paid, prices that they've sold for, inventory, crunches ball, and you come up, and whenever that blue line is above the red line, that's the sign the economy is expanding. I think you can look at that and see that. Whenever that blue line falls below, that's a sign the economy is expanding. I'm sorry, whenever the blue line falls below, that's a sign the economy is contracting and will probably contract for the next 3 to 4 months. That 34.6 is the lowest point in the history of the PMI for Houston. During the Great Recession, we hit 39.0 in March of 09. And here we are, this is already April of 20, and we're at 34.6. I hope to see us recover sometime, but it's just very unlikely that we're going to gain 16 or 20 points within the next month. This is something that will take place over a longer period of time, over several months. Hopefully it'll take place over several months and not over several years. They're very much concerned about how far it dropped and how long it's going to take to recover. If you want to look at one of the major activities that we have here in Houston is chemical manufacturing. This is put out by the American Chemistry Council. They look at things similar to what's looked at for a PMI. They look at sales, they look at employment, they look at rail car loadings, they look at production, crunch all those numbers together, and you can see this is for the US as a whole, but so much of the US chemical capacity is concentrated in Houston. This is pretty much indicative of what's going on here. So you can see the downturn in chemicals. I know I used this before, but I wanted to update so you can get some idea of where chemicals is now compared to where it was back in March. This is a new one that I've introduced. I want to thank Gabe Martinez on the line who helped me put this together. He found this information. This is doing business as filings in Harris County and where we are this time compared to last year. When people file DBAs when they start a business, it's not quite the same as in corporations, but they want to get out there, they want to get their name out there, they want to hold on to that name. And yeah, there might be some duplicates on either side. You kind of accept the fact that the duplicates are going to probably cancel themselves out, whether they were duplicates in 20 or duplicates in 19. And you can look and see as far as new business activity, as far as trying to start things up, you can definitely see the drop off in DBA filings in Harris County for during this period of the COVID virus. And they just really fell off. You know, you can do this online, and even online people aren't filing them. So if you want to look at what's going on with housing, we've been real happy leading up to about 3 months ago that we were setting records on a 12-month moving average. I mean, it's 12-month moving total, the number of houses are being sold. But you can see that new listings are down, active listings down, and average listing price is down. Part of it is people don't want strangers. I talked about this before. People don't want strangers coming into their house, not knowing whether they have the virus or not, whether they're going to leave the virus behind. And part of it is people are looking at the health of the economy and saying this is probably not a good time to put my house in the market, which is really quite a shame because this is the prime time for listing and selling a house. We see so much of our salespeople want to look, they want to buy, they want to get into their house in the summer prior to the school year starting. So it'll be interesting to see whether if things start to recede with the virus, whether we see this push back and we start to see a surge in the summer months as people try to hurriedly purchase a house and close on it so they can get in before school, or whether this is something which lasts over several months. Airport system traffic, we finally got March data. if you look at that, you can see each one of those bars represents the total number of passengers the Houston Airport System handled in March of 16, 17, 18. And then you look at 2020, the most recent. If you remember, we really didn't start our strong socialization policies till around March 10th, March 11th. And so we saw airlines still flying in the first part of the month, and that pretty much reflects what they did the first part of March. We won't have April data for some time yet, but we have national data. This is something I showed you guys on a previous presentation. This is for the entire US. This is the number of passengers the Transportation Safety Administration screens through all the airports in the US. That top bar you can see is where we were last year, or that top line, and the bottom line is where we are now. Pretty much flat line. You see maybe a slight uptick, and maybe there are people who just finally need to get home, or people who just can't postpone that trip anymore. But we're not seeing much of a recovery in aviation traffic. And I'm trying to remember, I was listening to the CEO of Boeing talk this morning, and I think he said it might take 3 to 5 years for the airlines finally get back to normal, which is fairly scary. So, let me go ahead and click on that button. I took my fingers off. This is kind of an amusing one. This is the City of Houston mixed beverage receipts. This is how much alcohol is being sold each month in Houston. And you can see January, February, and March. And then you can see we sold less than $13,000 worth of mixed drinks and beer at bars in Houston in April. I'm trying to think. That's probably one good night at one bar on Westheimer. But it just kind of shows this, if you kind of take this maybe as an example of social isolation, how people just really weren't going out. Also, this has implications because the city does get revenues from the mixed beverage receipts. If you want to look at their sales tax collections, how City of Houston sales tax collections have gone down in March compared to March of last year. And when people think of sales tax collections, they automatically jump and think of retail sales, but businesses pay a significant amount of sales tax as well when they go out and make taxable purchases, whether it's for office furniture or office supplies or computers and so forth like that. And so this is kind of a reflection of what happened in March. Once again, we were still doing well through middle of March, and then it dropped off. I suspect that when we get the April sales tax collections for the City of Houston, they'll be down even more. I mean, this is about a 10% drop right here. So as I click, okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about energy. There's not a lot to be said, just about how bad the situation is. If you want to look at refinery utilization, it's still real low. We saw a slight uptick. You know, a few more people are out driving, a few more people are traveling. But the refiners want to be at 90% or better. Right now, they're at about 70.5%. The refineries, if they're not running crude, if people are driving, they're not running crude, and then the refineries don't need to buy crude, which means we don't need to be producing crude. Especially when you see this happen with crude prices. You see that dip, that was because of an anomaly when we had contracts coming due and there's no place to store the oil, and people were worried about having to physically take the oil. Prices went down, but even after that, you can see crude prices have been around $20 a barrel. I looked this morning, WTI on the spot market was trading at about $25 a barrel. Industry needs at least $25 to $30 a barrel just to cover the cost of producing that barrel that's already been discovered. They're going to need 50 to 60 for us to see some exploration activity. So that's the one reason why you're seeing exploration activity fall, like you see right here. Now, we only had 374 rigs working last week. At the worst part of the fracking bust, it only fell to 404 rigs. So right now we have fewer rigs working out there in the field than we had at the worst part of the fracking bust. And you have to think about this. People talk about supply chains, and they think about supply chains as being literally the product. But if you think about it, the person who's at the rig site is the first person to get laid off, or the person who's working, supporting the rig site. The next person to get laid off is the guy who's manufacturing the blowout preventers, or the drill pipe, or the motors, or the cable that goes there. The next person to get laid off is the white collar worker in the office who's overseeing all this. And so anecdotally, I'm hearing of more people being laid off on the white collar side in Houston and energy. We'll get some insight to that when we get the April data, but it probably won't be until we get the May data that we'll see this. But we are due for some real challenging times. And you can see here in Bloomberg, the way the headlines were, oil spirals below zero and devastating day. You know, the next chapter of the oil crisis, the industry shuts down. Global oil demand starts a long, painful, and uncertain recovery. And it's interesting, if you notice, all three of these articles are written by the same guy. They were all written within about 2 weeks of each other. So they talk about the uncertain recovery, and I'm worried that may be a little premature. Because yeah, we might see a few more people driving, but we still have a huge overhang in supply. The refineries are only running at 70% of capacity. They really need to be running at 90% of capacity. So it's too soon to say the oil industry is about to recover. I expect we're going to see struggles through the end of this year. So once again, there's my bright spot poking through the crowds. Gosh, Patrick, this has been such a negative presentation, 3 in a row. Can't you say something good? Where's the chance for hope? Well, let me share just a few. This is something I pulled from the Dallas Fed's website. They've gone through and they've looked at all these different forecasts and forecasts of the recovery and how they've changed over time. You can see that the initial ones, and that top red slash line was something that came out in early March. The bottom line is something that came out in April. Yeah, it's showing maybe a deeper downturn and not quite getting back to where we want to be. But every one of these forecasts, you kind of believe in the wisdom of crowds. You take the average, is showing the economy starting to improve in 2020 around the third quarter. Not getting back to where we started the year at, but it does show that all these forecasters are looking to see that we are going to start seeing an improvement later on this year. We're seeing that in some of the own data. We did a survey, and anybody out there who received this email from me asking you to complete the survey, I want to thank you very, very much for doing that. I know that everyone's inboxes are getting bombarded. You're getting all sorts of survey requests, but this is probably the best real-time data we have of actually what's going on with the business community in Houston. And we asked them the simple question: compared to last week, has your overall situation gotten better, gotten worse, or not changed? And you can look at that over time. Gradually, you're seeing more and more people saying their situation is improving, just even if slightly it's improving. Part of it may be that just things don't look, back in April, we had no idea how bad this thing was going to be. And there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. But it's some sign that the kind of broader the business community, we are seeing a fourth of the firms out there saying that things seem to be getting better for them. If you go all the way back to April, gosh, you're looking at less than 10%. You're looking at only 7% saying things have gotten a little bit better since late March. We all know Governor Abbott started reopening the state on May 1st. This is data from our survey. We have a survey that's in inboxes right now, a survey from last week. Gives you some idea. You know, if you look over on the left-hand side, 48% of the firms out there never halted the operations. 2% since May 1st have fully resumed. So half the firms in Houston have fully resumed their operations. You kind of go around the chart, you can see 17% have partially resumed, 10% said they plan to reopen. So you're starting to see some movement towards reopening. You know, the big unknown is, the concern is, are we going to see a second wave? Are we going to have enough adequate measures in place? Is there going to be some social distancing? You know, it's kind of an experiment. It's just what's going to happen with reopening and what's going to be happening with the number of cases. And we're all wondering what is going to happen, what is going to be the big change that comes out of all this. People talk about, well, I guess there's going to be a lot of telecommuting. Well, we asked them, we gave them all these possible answers, and we said, check all that apply. What are the things that you're going to be seriously revisiting post-COVID-19 about your business operation? And you can look and see almost 2/3 of the respondents said they're going to reassess their practices on telecommuting. Now, we didn't ask them whether they're going to abolish it or extend it or whatever, but they're going to be taking a hard look at it. Technology needs need to be reassessed, relationships with customers and so forth, reassessed. So companies are already starting to look towards the future. They're already starting to see a little bit of improvement. The question is, what's the slope of that line look like? Is it going to be a check mark? Is it going to be a hockey stick? Some of you guys may remember a couple of years ago, I joked that the recovery is going to look more like a bathtub, a steep downturn, wide bottom, and suddenly shoot up. I hope this is, and that's kind of the way it played out. I hope this doesn't become a second bathtub. We really need to start seeing some growth and some economic activity, and hopefully we'll start to see that in the third quarter. With that, just before I go, I do want to put a pitch for Global Houston, which is going to be 2 weeks from tomorrow. You can find out information about it on the website. I'm stepping back and I'm trying to look a little bit more at some of the global COVID-19 issues and see how they're going to be impacting Houston. Because Houston is a global economy. So much of what we do in Houston depends upon what happens globally. I've been trying to think about how I'm going to characterize my presentation as I do my research. And probably you may see a slide on the screen that says BCAC. And we'll be talking about Houston and the global economy, BC before COVID, and Houston and the global economy, AC after COVID. So I really would like to encourage you to sign up for that. You can find details about that at the website. So with that, Carrie, I'm done. I'm ready to answer any questions people may have. And once again, I'm sorry if I went long on you guys, but I felt I had a lot of information I wanted to share.
Patrick, thanks so much. That was great. I think you answered some of the questions that we had come in through the Q&A tab. So we don't have a lot, but I do have a couple. And the first one is from Randy, and he actually had sent this in prior to the webinar. But if you could talk a little bit more about the healthcare industry in Houston with the Texas Medical Center. It's such an important part of our economy. And what do you see in terms of its health, and excuse the pun, but its health, and have you seen, or do we see a lot of layoffs or furloughs, or what's happening to that particular industry?
Okay, that's a good question. You would think at this point that you would see a surge in healthcare activities. The surge that you're seeing is surge related to the treatment of COVID-19. Texas Medical Center is very important. Texas Medical Center employs a little over 100,000 people in the region. You need to understand healthcare in the region employs over 300,000. So healthcare, as important as it is, only accounts for about a third of the people employed in healthcare in the social assistance sector. If you go to the state's website and you look at, and you try to get very much detailed data on the state, you'd be surprised. The number one job sector that's reported unemployment insurance claims is retail. Either number 2 or number 3 is dental offices. The dental offices have closed and people are reluctant to go to the dentist for health reasons, and the dentists and the healthcare practitioners have had to close or scale back their operations. You also have to think of it in this terms. In the US, our health insurance, so much of our health insurance is tied to where we work. And if we're seeing 300,000 people, at least in Houston, having lost their jobs, we may have seen 300,000 people in Houston having lost their health insurance. Some of them may be able to carry it on through COBRA, and the demand for the healthcare is going to be there, but I'm not sure the ability to pay for healthcare is going to be there. And that is definitely a concern. So hopefully that answers your question, Randy.
Great, Patrick. What do we see a recovery or a rebound? And let's think about it in terms of Q1 2021. I mean, is that a possibility?
I feel better about 2021 than Q1 2021 than I do about Q3 2020. Use a cliche, the virus is in the driver's seat. If we feel like we've got this thing in check and we're not going to have a huge second surge, yeah, by Q1 2021, we should start seeing significant growth. If we find out that there's a second wave or a second outbreak, it's going to depend upon how consumers behave to that. We could see ourselves going through another lockdown, or it could be that people become nonchalant and say, okay, I'm going to take my risk, and if I get it, I'll build up the antibodies. So there's really a lot of uncertainty, but I do feel better about Q1 2021. If for no other reason, we will have more experience dealing with COVID-19. We may have a vaccination. We'll understand antibodies better. We'll have a better idea of what's the right way to social distance and still go to the park or to the movie or to the restaurant. How can you bring people back in the office and not have everybody paranoid that they're their mate next door to them in their little cube is going to get them sick. So I feel better about Q1 than I do about Q3. But if we have a resurgence, then it's going to push the recovery back another quarter or two.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, so we're in a little bit of a recovery. People are potentially returning to the offices or essential work. When people do start driving again, do you see that there might be a fuel shortage since refineries will need time to recover? And this comes from Terry Crawford.
No, there is no danger of a fuel shortage, because when you hear people talking about no place to store crude, and that's the reason why crude prices are going down, we're also running out of places to store refined products. I mean, the refineries would take, with crude this low, they would love to load up on it. And what's the classic? You buy low, sell high. They'd love to buy the crude cheap, refine it, store it, and then sell it when the demand goes up at a higher price. But even the refineries and the refining companies don't have enough storage for everything. And so, no, I see no chance of there being a spike in gas prices. You know, you're going to see gas prices go up just because demand goes up. But the refineries, once the demand goes up, the refineries are going to start pulling stuff out of inventory, and they're going to start pulling stuff, the crude out of pipelines, and they'll be able to meet that fairly quickly. This is not like a hurricane where you've got refineries taken permanently offline or pipelines have been disrupted. So we'll be seeing low gasoline prices for at least the next few quarters.
Okay. For the fall, we're heading into the summer months right now. What do you see if the schools do not reopen in the fall? Parents are still having to stay at home. Do you see this being a factor in terms of the recovery?
Now you're asking me more about social policy than economics. It is a challenge to work at home with a young child. I don't have young children at home, but I have several coworkers that do, and we've traded anecdotes. I can see people continuing to work from home if you have the sort of occupation that allows you to. But at some point, even those of us who are working from home are going to be pressured to either have layoffs or wage reductions or something, because if everyone is still working from home, if the economy is still in shutdown, you're simply going to see less and less revenues coming in. So if people, back up, you said if people have to have their children at home while they're working, or what's the school going to look like? Yeah, it's going to slow the economy down. It's going to put more challenges out there. People are finding ways to work around it. But yes, if schools stay closed in the fall, it can't help but interfere with the workers' productivity as much as they try. They're making up for it by working split shifts and so forth. I know they're working a lot harder, but some people just can't do that, especially those, the white collar workers can find a way to work around it. Those who need to be physically present can't, and that way it would slow down the recovery.
Thanks, Patrick. We actually have several additional questions, but we are running out of time. So if Roel and Elizabeth, you have an opportunity to answer. And Patrick, if you don't mind staying on this call for a few minutes after we conclude and potentially answer questions that have come in through the Q&A tab, that would be great. I want to, again, remind everyone that Patrick does have an event coming up on May 27th. It's his Houston Global Economy event, so please do register for that. There'll be lots of new information there. We also have a couple of other events that are coming up this week. In fact, one that starts at 2 o'clock today, which is our Innovation Council, Healthcare, Digital Tech. And then tomorrow, our Women's Business Alliance is going to be meeting with coaches to help them with life and professional skills during this crisis. But Patrick, I'm kind of leaving you with a final Q&A. This is National Small Business Month, and do you have any messages for the small business community in terms of their kind of economic future? Anything that you'd like to share on the small business front? And that's kind of a loaded question. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I ask you guys to hang in there. You guys account for 1/3 of all the jobs in the economy, not just in Houston, but nationwide. I'll let you know, I've been going to my Ace Hardware to Birds Unlimited, to my neighborhood little Schlotzky's, trying to support them. I wish I could spend money at every one of your shops, but unfortunately I can only spend those at the ones in my neighborhood. Just let's get hang in there. I do see things slowly getting better. If you could just please hang in there, and I wish you all the best.
Well, great. Thank you, Patrick. Again, appreciate your time. Patrick will be back, but he does have a new address that he's working on in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for more information about that. I'll leave this screen up so you all have a chance to read through what he's going to be talking about in a couple of weeks. Look forward to having you join us for our next Houston Business Forum webinar, and you can visit us at houston.org/events to get a list of all the things that are coming up throughout the next couple of weeks. Again, Patrick, thank you. Thanks to your team. I know you'll stay on and check that Q&A tab for everyone that has joined us today. Thanks, everyone.